Most people look at the story of Jacob and Laban as a simple family dispute over spotted sheep. They see a long-suffering nephew and a dishonest uncle. But if you look at the text through the lens of modern business, you find the most brilliant corporate raid in history. Jacob entered Laban's service with nothing but a staff in his hand. 20 years later, he walked away with the majority of Laban's wealth, leaving his greedy employer in the dust. He did not do it through theft or luck. He did it through a superior know-how that his boss did not even know existed. In this video, I'm going to show you how Jacob used professional excellence to strip a greedy employer of his assets and build a massive capital base from scratch. Jacob was a man who understood the value of time and the weight of a signature. He did not just show up and punch a clock for 20 years. He was an analyst. He was watching how the herds moved, how they ate, and how they reproduced. He was also watching how Laban operated. Laban was the kind of owner who thought his employees were his property. He viewed human capital as a resource to be used up and discarded. Jacob recognized this early on, but he did not quit immediately. He stayed to gather data, build his reputation, and wait for the perfect moment to pivot from servant to competitor. A greedy employer does not want you to succeed. They want you to stay useful while they move the goalposts. This is the core of the Laban Trap. In the ancient world, a contract was often verbal, but it was spiritually and socially binding. Laban used these bonds to squeeze every drop of sweat out of Jacob. In Genesis 31 verse 7, Jacob points out that his wages were changed 10 times. 10 times is not a mistake or a simple market adjustment. It is a calculated strategy to prevent an employee from building equity. Every time Jacob started to pull ahead, Laban changed the terms of the deal to reset Jacob's progress back to zero. This is the classic corporate trap, where the rules change every time you start to win. Laban represents the old money boss who thinks he owns the results because he owns the land. He forgets that the results are produced by the talent. Jacob is the new money disruptor. He knows that in the long run, talent always beats ownership if the talent is strategic. Jacob stayed in this toxic environment not because he was weak, but because he was building a legal and moral case. He was documenting the abuse so that when he finally made his move, no one could claim he was the aggressor. Consider the case of Kevin. Kevin is a top-tier salesman at a mid-sized medical supply firm. He's the kind of guy who arrives early and knows every client's birthday. Last year, Kevin exceeded his sales targets by 40%. Instead of a massive bonus, his manager changed the commission structure. The manager claimed the company needed to reinvest in infrastructure. This happened 3 years in a row. Every time Kevin hits a new peak, the company moves the peak higher. Kevin is living in the modern Laban trap. He is being punished for his own efficiency. The mistake most people make in Kevin's position is getting angry and quitting without a plan. Jacob did not do that. He realized that as long as he worked for Laban's goals, he would remain a slave to Laban's whims. He needed to find a way to make his work benefit himself more than it benefited the firm. He remained a high performer to keep Laban's guard down. While Laban was focused on the short-term profits Jacob was generating, Jacob was focused on the long-term acquisition of knowledge. He was learning the biology of the business better than the owner ever would. If you have ever felt like your hard work was being harvested by someone who did not earn it, you need to pay attention. We're going to break down how to flip the script and turn your expertise into your exit ramp. Go to the comments right now and type, "I am a professional." This is your first step in reclaiming your value and acknowledging that your skill belongs to you, not your boss. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop being a victim of corporate shifting and start building your own empire. We are moving from the trap to the strategy. Jacob realized that hard work alone would never make him rich as long as Laban held the pen. He needed a strategy that Laban could not regulate or tax. He needed to find a blind spot in Laban's management style. Laban was focused on the quantity of the sheep, but Jacob was focused on the quality of the genetics. This brings us to the most controversial and brilliant part of the story. Jacob was about to introduce a level of technical sophistication that would effectively transfer the wealth of the firm into his own pockets. When you have a skill the boss does not understand, you have a leverage that no contract can take away. This is the genetic edge. Focus on the text in Genesis 30 verses 37 to 43. Jacob used a specific breeding technique involving peeled rods of poplar, almond, and plane trees. Many people read this and think it as some kind of folk magic or a lucky break from God. It was not magic. It was an early form of genetic selection and advanced animal husbandry. Jacob was a specialist. He knew how to produce the strongest, most valuable livestock by manipulating the environment and the breeding cycles. Jacob proposed a deal that seemed like a win for Laban. He told Laban he would only take the speckled and spotted sheep as his pay. To a casual observer like Laban, these were the outliers, the weaker or less desirable animals. Laban thought he was getting the better end of the deal. He thought he was giving Jacob the scrap heap while keeping the premium stock for himself. But Jacob knew something Laban did not. He knew how to trigger the production of those specific traits. He was essentially using a proprietary algorithm to create a high-value product out of what looked like waste. This was Jacob's intellectual property. Laban owned the physical sheep, but Jacob owned the knowledge of how to multiply them. In modern business, this is the difference between owning the factory and owning the patent. The factory can be replaced, but the patent is where the real wealth lives. Jacob was building his own capital base using Laban's resources as the raw material. He made sure that the stronger animals bred to produce his speckled sheep, while the weaker ones bred for Laban. Over time, the quality of Laban's flock hit a floor, while Jacob's flock hit the ceiling. Look at the case of Linda. Linda is an IT specialist who has worked for a logistics company for a decade. She built a proprietary tracking system from the ground up that only she can maintain. The company thinks they own the software because they paid her salary while she wrote it. However, the logic of the system is so specific to Linda's unique way of thinking that they cannot fire her without the entire operation collapsing. She has created a form of genetic edge within the company's digital infrastructure. She has total job security and high leverage because she owns the know-how. Jacob did not just work harder. He worked smarter by using a secret know-how that Laban completely ignored. He was using the boss's own assets to fund his future independence. Every time a spotted lamb was born, Jacob's personal net worth increased. He was not stealing. He was simply being more efficient than the man who signed his checks. He was outthinking a man who thought he could only be outworked. Jacob was about to turn Laban's own flock into his personal fortune, and there was nothing Laban could do to stop it. He had the technical advantage, and in the world of economic warfare, the man with the most information always wins. Leaving a toxic environment is not an escape. It is a relocation of assets. Most people wait until they are at a breaking point to quit their jobs. They leave in a huff, send a bridge-burning email, and walk out with no plan and no capital. Jacob was far more disciplined than the average worker. He had spent years accumulating wealth, but he knew that wealth was vulnerable as long as it sat on Laban's land. He did not just need to be rich, he needed to be mobile. In Genesis 31 verses 17 to 21, we see the execution of a masterful exit strategy. Jacob did not quit on a whim or because he had a bad day. He waited for the seasonal window. This happened when Laban was away shearing his sheep. In the ancient world, sheep shearing was a massive, time-consuming operation that took the owner away from the main camp for days or weeks. Jacob used this gap in supervision to move his entire operation. He gathered his wives, his children, his servants, and his thousands of animals. This was not a panic flight. It was a logistical relocation of a massive corporate entity. Jacob had ensured that his capital was ready for transport long before he gave the order to move. He understood that a professional does not burn bridges until they have already built a new city. If you leave a job before your own infrastructure is solid, you're just a refugee. Timing and operational security are the two pillars of a successful transition. Jacob did not announce his departure to Laban because he knew his boss's psychology. Laban would have used legal or physical force to stop him. Instead, Jacob maintained total silence until he was 3 days' journey away. He used that distance to create a buffer zone between his future and his past. In business, you do not tell your boss you are starting a competing firm while you're still using their office supplies. You build quietly, in the dark, until the moment of your reveal. Consider the case of Robert. Robert was a senior consultant at a predatory marketing agency. For years, he watched the firm overcharge clients while providing mediocre service. Robert knew he could do better, but he did not quit immediately. Instead, he spent 12 months quietly building his own infrastructure. He set up his own legal entity and built a proprietary software tool on his own time. Robert did not leave until his exit ramp was fully paved. When he finally handed in his resignation, he was not looking for a new job. He was simply moving his daily operations from one office to another. He had his own servers, his own legal protection, and his own cash reserves. Because he planned his exit with the precision of a military operation, his former boss could not touch him. Robert did not escape. He transitioned from an employee to a competitor. Jacob's departure was a calculated move designed to protect the wealth he had spent 20 years building. He knew that if he asked for permission to leave, Laban would find a way to seize the flocks. By moving during the shearing season, he took advantage of his employer's distraction. He put the mountains between himself and his past. He understood that in a high-stakes exit, speed and distance are your best friends. But a clean exit requires more than just a fast horse. It requires a moral high ground that even a dishonest boss cannot dispute. You can have all the money in the world, but if your reputation is stained by theft or laziness, you are vulnerable. Jacob knew that Laban would eventually catch up to him. He knew there would be a confrontation. He did not just prepare his camels. He prepared his defense. He was ready to stand his ground because his record was clean. Divine favor is not a substitute for excellence. It is the multiplier of it. Many people think that God blessed Jacob simply because he was the chosen one. They ignore the 20 years of grueling, high-performance labor that preceded the blessing. In Genesis 31 verses 36 to 42, Jacob finally faces Laban and delivers a masterclass in professional defense. He points out that for 20 years, he bore the losses of the flock himself. If a predator took a sheep, Jacob paid for it out of his own pocket. Jacob worked through the scorching heat of the day and the biting frost of the night. He did not sleep when he was on the clock. He was a perfect steward, even under a corrupt owner. This is a critical lesson for anyone working in a difficult environment. Your best legal defense in business is a documented history of undeniable value and integrity. When Laban accused Jacob of theft, Jacob could point to 2 decades of flawless service. Jacob's integrity was his armor. He did not cut corners just because Laban was a cheat. He maintained his standards because he knew he was working for a higher authority. This is why God intervened. God did not just protect Jacob because of a promise. He protected the integrity of the contract. Jacob had fulfilled his side of the deal with excellence, and Laban had violated his side 10 times. The divine intervention was a legal correction of a broken human system. In the modern world, this looks like a business owner we will call Sarah. Sarah worked for a large tech firm before starting her own boutique agency. Her former employer was furious and sued her for theft of clients. They wanted to crush her before she could become a threat. But Sarah's documentation was flawless. She had kept meticulous records of every interaction, every contract, and every hour worked. She never used company time to build her own brand. When the case went to court, her former employer looked foolish. Sarah's professional conduct was beyond reproach. She had been a model employee until the day she resigned. Because her track record was clean, the judge dismissed the case and even ordered the former employer to pay her legal fees. Sarah's excellence was her best defense. She did not need to play dirty to win because her history of integrity spoke for her. Type, "I'm a steward of my skill" in the comments right now. This is a declaration that you will not let a bad boss lower your standards. Your excellence is your property. Your integrity is your insurance policy. When you work with that level of intensity, you invite a level of protection that no HR department can provide. You are building a case for your own success that will stand up under any scrutiny. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their hard work is being noticed by the only judge who matters. Jacob's story teaches us that professional excellence creates a shield. Laban came to the meeting ready for war, but God warned him in a dream not to touch Jacob. Why? Because Jacob had earned his keep. He had transformed Laban's business while building his own. He was no longer a nephew looking for a handout. He was a sovereign economic power. He had moved from the position of a servant to the position of a peer. Laban pursued Jacob with the intent to destroy him, but he found himself staring into the face of a man who was no longer an employee, but a sovereign power with a divine backing. Jacob had the receipts. He had the animals. Most importantly, he had the favor that follows a man who keeps his word when everyone else is breaking theirs. The transition was complete. The employee had become the mogul, and the greedy boss was left with nothing but a shrinking business and a bitter heart. You do not become a mogul by working for a salary. You become a mogul by owning the production. Genesis 30 verse 43 tells us that Jacob increased exceedingly. This was not a slow, incremental growth of a few percent a year. This was an explosion of wealth that completely shifted the power balance in the region. Jacob did not just have more sheep than Laban. He had a different kind of wealth altogether. He realized that once he owned the primary source of production, he could trade that surplus for other high-value assets. He did not stay in one niche. The text says he acquired large flocks and maidservants and men servants and camels and donkeys. This is a masterclass in diversification and vertical integration. He used his sheep to buy labor, and he used his labor to manage larger herds. He then traded his livestock for camels, which were the heavy-duty transport vehicles of the ancient world. Jacob was no longer just a shepherd. He was a logistics and trade titan. Most people get stuck in this specialist trap. They learn one skill, like breeding sheep, and they stay there forever. They become the best at what they do, but they never own the system. Jacob understood that the sheep were just the entry point. He used the profits from his genetic edge to buy into other industries. He built a diversified portfolio that made him resilient to market shifts or local droughts. Consider the story of a modern entrepreneur we will call Marcus. Marcus started as a freelance copywriter, working for a greedy agency that took 80% of his fees. He was the best writer they had, but he was struggling to pay his bills. He decided to use the Jacob strategy. He did not just write more ads. He started using his skills to build his own digital products. He traded his time for assets. Today, Marcus does not just write copy. He owns a software company and a real estate portfolio. He used his primary skill to fund his secondary and tertiary investments. He moved from doing the work to owning the system. He realized that the goal was not to be the best paid servant, but to be the most effective owner. Marcus, like Jacob, understands that true prosperity comes from scaling your vision beyond your own physical labor. Wealth is a tool for reconciliation, not just a shield for isolation. As Jacob moved toward his homeland, he faced a threat far greater than Laban, his brother Esau. Years prior, Jacob had fled because Esau wanted to kill him. Now, Jacob was returning with a massive caravan of wealth, but he knew that gold could not stop a sword. He had to use his capital strategically to buy peace and secure his future. He did not hide his wealth or act like a victim. He sent massive waves of gifts ahead of him. Hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, and bulls. He used his surplus to show Esau that he was no longer a threat or a competitor for their father's local resources. Jacob used his wealth to change the narrative. He turned a blood feud into a diplomatic negotiation. He understood that money is a form of leverage that can solve problems before they even reach your doorstep. Many people use their wealth to show off or to separate themselves from others. Jacob used his wealth to build bridges. He knew that his capital gave him options that a poor man simply does not have. He was able to pacify a vengeful brother because he had the resources to be incredibly generous. This is the ultimate purpose of kingdom wealth. It is not just for your comfort. It is for your influence and your ability to bring peace to chaotic situations. Look at the case of a business leader who used their profits to save a local hospital from closing. They did not just write a check. They used their influence to restructure the hospital's debt and bring in new management. They used their capital to solve a problem that affected thousands of people. Their wealth became a tool for social stability. They understood that being a mogul means having the power to be a blessing on a massive scale. Jacob had successfully completed the greatest wealth transfer of the ancient world. He had entered Laban's house as a penniless refugee and left as a sovereign power. He had outmaneuvered a greedy boss, protected his assets through integrity, and scaled his business into an empire. But the final victory was his ability to use that empire to restore his family. He had moved from the trap to the throne, and he did it by following the laws of the harvest. Type, "I'm a manager" in the comments right now. This is your final declaration for this series. It is an acknowledgement that you are not a victim of your employer or your economy. You are a steward of the skills and opportunities God has placed in your path. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to take these ancient blueprints and build a future that cannot be shaken. We are here to help you move from the servant's quarters to the master's table. Jacob's rise was not magic. It was management. It was not luck. It was a relentless commitment to excellence. He proved that even in a rigged system, a man with superior know-how and divine backing can win. God does not multiply mess. He multiplies order and professional intensity. If you're stuck in a Laban trap today, remember that the exit ramp is paved with your own integrity and your unique expertise. You have the map. You have the case study. Now, you must have the courage to execute. Stop complaining about your boss and start building your own genetics. Stop waiting for a handout and start creating a genetic edge that the world cannot ignore. The flocks are waiting for a leader who knows how to multiply them. Go build your empire and change your family's history forever.